Today on Co-op for Two, Greg and I review the cooperative game Mists over Carcassonne. You're watching Co-op for Two. I'm Jesse. I'm here with Greg.
Thanks for having me on your channel.
Before we get started, let's go down to the table and see how this game plays. Mists over Carcassonne is a standalone cooperative version of the popular Carcassonne competitive tile-laying game series. It was designed by Klaus Jorgen Red and published by Hans im Gluck in 2022. It plays from 1 to 5 players in about 35 minutes. It's a low-weight complexity tile-laying game with push-your-luck elements and multiple ways of scoring. The game can be played at 6 different levels. Each level increases the difficulty and includes minor rule differences. Gameplay is nearly identical to the well-known competitive game of Carcassonne, but players work as a team to achieve a single target score while avoiding several new instant loss conditions. Players begin each game by deciding which of the 6 levels they will play and then following the setup instructions for that level. First, set aside a number of ghost tokens, then set markers on the score track to remind you of your intermediate scoring targets and the team's current score. Shuffle the face-down tiles into a number of stacks. Depending on the number of players, divide up the colored worker meeples. With 3 or more players, each player receives 5 meeples of their color. For less than 3 players, each player will receive meeples in multiple colors. The oversized starting tile is placed in the center of the table. Players take turns clockwise. On a player's turn, they reveal a tile and then connect it to one of the existing tiles on the table, rotating as they wish, but ensuring that all touching sides match features. Roads must connect to roads, cities must connect to cities, etc. The main new feature on tiles in Mists of Carcassonne is the Mist feature, which shows from 0 to 3 ghosts. After placing a tile, players may need to add the number of shown ghost tokens to the tile. If insufficient number exists in the supply, the players lose the game. Mists do not have to be matched between connecting tiles. However, doing so does reduce the number of ghosts placed by 1. And if an entire mist region is closed off, all ghosts in that region are returned to the supply. As in normal Carcassonne, after placing a tile, the active player may be allowed to add one of their meeples to the tile. If a region of connecting features is completed, it is scored and players may remove their meeples from that region. Scoring rules are similar to standard Carcassonne. The larger the region and the more different colored meeples inside it, the larger the score. Alternatively, players may choose to remove 3 ghosts from any tile instead of taking the points for completing a region. A new cemetery tile provides additional interactions with ghosts depending on the level played. Players win if they can reach the target score goal within the level specified number of tiles. Players lose if they fail to do so or if they run out of ghost tokens. Mists over Carcassonne also includes solo rules and rules for playing with the tiles as an expansion to a standard competitive game of Carcassonne. Before we start with the review, I think it's useful to say what our experience is with Carcassonne. So what's your experience with Carcassonne?
Oddly enough, this is a game I know is a very famous game, but I've only owned the app version. I bought the app version, and I really enjoyed it. It's very, very good for a solo game in terms of playing on the app and stuff. So I've really enjoyed it. Almost as a filler game or whatever. So that's kind of, I guess, how I feel about it.
It does almost feel like a little bit of a filler game. I've played it once or twice. I don't love it. I don't love tile-laying games in general, but I have a little bit of experience with it. And now let's talk about components and maybe say how it differs from Carcassonne.
Sure. Well, I think that's a pretty quick discussion. The components are good. I mean, they look good. The art looks great. And the theme it makes sense, but it's not really much of a thematic game. I don't think this is the kind of game you're coming into because of this wonderfully deluxe experience or whatever. I mean, it's relatively inexpensive, and it is pretty quick and easy to learn. It has 6 different scenarios in here, and there are 2 different rule sets. One, if you want to play the standalone cooperative experience, and the other one if you want to use it in the competitive version of the game as a expansion.
And it does feel like you're playing Carcassonne.
Yeah, oh yeah.
All right, so let's talk about decisions and stuff like that. We're going to try this a little bit differently. I've broken it into sort of pros and cons, and I'm curious to hear your take on some of these. So first pro, this is a thing you mentioned a lot, is the games are quick. And that makes a big difference here, don't you think?
Yeah, I think it has like a bit of it. So we just played this game Sky Team recently, and that was like very quick to play, and but it was fun, but it was also very tense where you couldn't play a lot of it. I think there's a lot of games like that, and this game is also like that where it can kind of burn you out on the harder levels, but on the easier levels, it's a great filler. Like you could play in like 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Later games maybe can skew more towards 40 minutes, but like. It's I love having a game in that like maybe not weight but time.
We don't play a lot of games that are quick, and it
Yeah.
is nice to play them. It does feel a little bit like a snack, and that is a good segue to something that might be a little bit of a con here, which is the randomness and the swinginess. It does feel like you could get some bad tiles in a certain order and have a game that's very much easier or much harder, but a fast game makes some of that more forgivable.
Yeah, I often talk about that. The fact that like the shorter the game is, the more you're willing to stand for a little bit of swinginess because the game will end quickly, either in victory or defeat, and then you can play again or play for a more balanced version or whatever. I thought you were kind of going to go into the strategy versus tactics. This game, of course, is like Carcassonne is very tactical. There's not a large overarching strategy, although there is some in some of the later levels. You can kind of plan ahead, hoping to like catch some of the cemeteries that make a little home for like a cemetery or something like that. So there's a little bit of that, but I quite like tactical games. I think part of that like there's not so much bandwidth where you're like just stressing about decisions. Sometimes it's nice just to be like, okay, well, what are we doing with this tile right now? And it kind of feels like a little bit popcorny or candy-ish where you're like, oh, that was kind of fun. What's next? Oh, let's put that here. And I tend to, you said you don't really like tile playing games. I tend to enjoy them quite a bit. So I like that sort of thing.
Well, I think for me, the heart of what's interesting here, you've sort of touched on. We talk about, normally when we talk about these cooperative games, we talk about sort of tactical decisions on a turn by turn. And often I criticize a game if it doesn't have long-term planning. Now this game introduces a different little dimension there. There aren't really long-term plans here. I mean, you know what goals, what scores you have to get at. And certainly most of this stuff, you're talking about tactical decisions, where to put this tile. But there actually is a middle ground element in this game, which is when we play this and go through these different levels, we've had talks about we should be building one big, like sort of overarching strategies or almost like tactical, long-term tactical decisions about what kinds of goals we should be going for. Should we be trying to go for a strategy that goes for these castles? Should we be trying to get our points through one giant thing? And one of the real beauties of this game, having these 6 levels, is it sort of breaks, they're almost designed to break your previous strategy. Like we played the first level, we figured out a way to beat it. And then the second level, it's almost like someone was watching us. It's like, okay, now you're going to have to do it in this fashion that breaks your previous strategy.
Yeah, I think that's kind of an interesting thing. It is a puzzle. Like I have 2 thoughts on that. One is that I completely agree that like, I like the idea that like, you're like, this is clearly the way to win. You know, this is going to be how we're going to beat this. And then the next level is like, it's like the designer figured that out, that they knew what the optimal strategy would be. A lot of times in like living card games, those sort of things, like they'll have some thing where like there's a predominantly good strategy that a lot of players will use, and then whatever scenario, like for Arkham Horror or Lord of the Rings or Marvel Champions or something like that, and then they'll say, okay, well this is how most people are winning the games now, so now we're gonna figure out a way to punish that, so that it's forcing you to change how you're playing, which is kind of cool. I thought that was like one of the more interesting parts of that.
Yeah.
And to sort of jump off from that a little bit, not to mention again Sky Team, but like Sky Team, I know Magic Maze. I really love a game that is very simple and approachable and you can play. And I think there's sort of like when you play like a mobile game or a computer game or something, and it's like it starts you off super simple, but then it's like, oh, and then here's another rule and here's another rule. I love the scenario-based thing because you can pick up the game super fast, so you're playing immediately, and then as they add rules and add complexity, it's much easier to understand and to fold in, and then it makes the game has much more variety. And so I really love like games like that have a sort of like mini campaign or something, like I said, like Magic Maze is a perfect example of that. And it's like you like the basic system, and now you get to kind of do that again.
I mean, I'm on the same page with you. I love that kind of thing. We should say here, though, that there are 6 levels. They're very similar. They're just adding a little bit each time. And not only that, you can't play this game on different difficulty levels. Those 6 levels are your difficulty levels. They get harder and harder. And there's a big post on Board Game Geek about how can you really win level 6. It's very hard. It feels like you have to get very lucky. And we played them all in one night. They feel like snacks. So there's not like there's a ton of replayability here or a ton of scenarios. You go through them very quick. And you and I had a big complaint about one of them. They're these cemetery tiles you didn't talk about. You said how great the components were, but there's a very weird. There's a very weird choice here. You want to talk about it? Very weird design choice.
So they have these. There's 5 tiles. I don't know how many exactly. There's 60 tiles, I believe, in the thing, and 5 of them are these these cemetery tiles. It's a picture of a cemetery, and it has a function in the early game, and then in the later game, in the later levels, the rule set for the cemeteries completely changes.
Yeah.
And I think that's a bit of a missed opportunity for because there's a point where wait, which parts of this function the same as when it was just a cemetery, and which parts are different when you're not.
Why not just give us 5 different tiles and call them different for different things?
That's exactly what was going to be my point. Is that you would think and I can understand hey, make 5 new tiles and call it something completely different. Call it tombs or crypts instead of cemetery tiles. Now I can know immediately someone's going to say, well, that's 5 more tiles. That increases the cost of the game. Yes, but you get this massive cardboard thing, which has this very small amount of information just for setup, and you could even still have it be cardboard and just have it be half the size. And this is about 5 tiles and half of this, which seems like that's the way to go, which is really strange to me. Yeah. And just another to pivot off that a little bit into the fact that the competitive game has completely different rules for these pieces, like the ghosts and the cemeteries and all these other tiles. I would see if you were a player of both games, if you wanted to be able to play cooperatively and competitively. I don't tend to like a game that has the idea that okay, this is how this piece acts in this game, and then it acts completely different in this other game. I don't particularly like that, because then you're like, wait, how does this work this time? How much health does this piece have in this version versus this version versus this version? I think I like it when the piece acts the same in all the games, personally. What do you think about competitive wise?
I'm not sure. I don't agree with your complaint about the competitive. I mean, the competitive rules are completely separate. If you're the family that wants, there's so many expansions for Carcassonne. It's hard to see why you would buy this if you didn't like cooperative games. But you're probably not gonna be playing it both ways every other week. I mean, so I'm not sure you'll get really confused.
That's a good way to jump into competitive. I had said this to you when we kind of took a walk. We were playing this all day. We were just taking walks and things in between. And, I was like, is this really that much different than Carcassonne? Is it really more enjoyable to play this? Why wouldn't you just play Carcassonne? It has essentially the same exact feel. It is cool discussing what to do and hey, do you think we should place this here? Do you think we should use our piece to get rid of the ghosts, or should we try to use scoring here? And so it is fun to talk about that, but I'm not sure it's weird, because it's I like to play this. I really enjoyed it, but do you play the other version?
I don't understand this complaint, because
it's not a complaint. It's
I know, but if you rephrase that, what you're basically saying is, hey, if you like Carcassonne, this really feels like Carcassonne, but it's cooperative.
Yeah.
And I was trying to remember Carcassonne. I was like, Greg, but I was making your point. I was saying in Carcassonne, you're not really antagonistic towards the other players. You're basically doing your own solo, and you reminded me that no, that's not true. You're constantly screwing over your opponents in Carcassonne. So this really feels like Carcassonne, but it's cooperative. So if your family likes Carcassonne, but you want to not be at each other's throats so much, this is perfect. You
know who else this is really great for, though? I think is solo gamers. This makes a wonderful 2-player game, and I think an amazing solo game. So if you like to play solo games, it's the 2-player game and the 1-player game are the same. You get there are incentives for having multiple meeples, multiple colored meeples on a road. You can plan to set up a road. You have to put your colored meeples on the roads before they're joined because you can't otherwise. And same thing with cities and things like that. But it's really kind of neat because you get in the 2-player game, you each take 3 of each color, and there's that mini decision of like, what color should I put here? And the solo game is the same thing. You just get all the meeples that you would in the 2-player game. And I really feel like this game, I can't imagine this being really fun. I think if I were going to play this more than 2 players, just play Carcassonne. Like, I feel like the discussion about where to put the pieces like would devolve. I just feel like that's not enough.
I think you're right.
Not enough meat on the bone for 4 players to have a discussion about. I think this is the one to go. Let's put it here or put it here. So I think this game for me, and I say this not having played a large player count game, but I feel like this definitely is a much better for 1 or 2 player game. I don't think it looks interesting to me to play it in another way. And in that time, just play regular Carcassonne.
Well, it is true that when you're playing 2-player cooperative, you're basically playing a solo game. At least the way we play it, we're making decisions as a group. The only caveat to that, I do agree that this is basically would be a very good solo game. The only caveat is maybe my final statement on this, which is just that I'm not sure there's much replayability here. It is fun to go through all 6 levels. We did all 6 in one day, but playing it doesn't feel very different when you play the same level again. You feel like, well, we've been here, we've done it, we've beat it. I'm not sure how much replayability you would get here.
So, Jesse and I kind of run against the grain on this one in terms of like most people don't like the idea of a game being like not replayable. They're like, it's a campaign game, it's a story game, it's a legacy game. They get angry even if they're never going to play it 20 times. They get mad that 20 times is the only amount of time that they can play it. But for me, like we love that, and I think at my local game shop this was $40 I bought it, and it's like something like that. And to me, I'm like, it was well worth the full day to do that, right? But I will disagree. So I think it's worth it for that alone to go through the levels and things. But I think I also disagree. I think this is one that I could keep on my shelf forever and just every now and again pull it off. You got time for a 20-minute game. I think having that filler, that 20 or 25-minute filler on your shelf ready to go at any given time is great for the end of the game session or whatever. So I think it's really good for that. I did want to mention 2 other things about this before we part. Number one, Jesse and I often talk about like what makes a cooperative game fun. And that is usually the idea of, one thing that you kind of touched on earlier is the idea of, like pandemic, when to treat disease and when to go for the win. And this game has kind of that, you're handling the ghosts and then you're also trying to score the points. So you have to balance that quite well. And I think that's very well done here. The other thing is sudden death. There's no ramping. So in normal cooperative games, there has to be some ramp, so the game is getting harder and harder and harder. So it's pushing back against you, and it's leading to a satisfying conclusion. And it's not just a static thing. Sometimes we feel like there's no clock in a game. We'll talk about that sometimes. And there isn't really. This is such a short game, but this game, much like, and I don't mean to keep mentioning Sky Team, but I feel like these shorter games that we played recently, both that and this Mists of Carcassonne, they're like, insta death is right around the corner. And in this game, you get in a little bit of danger, but like you could get in real trouble really quickly. So I feel like the game can end pretty quickly. So it's a little bit differently, not so much of that grind of the game getting this sort of, leverage over you. But in this kind of game, it ends quicker. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. There are a couple fun decisions here, but as you say, you're sort of treating these ghosts, a couple ghosts that come out, you're like, no big deal. Then all of a sudden you realize you're in real danger. And it does have that element that we both love is sort of when you have to switch gears. And there's some point where you're like, okay, we got to push and build this out and get our score, or we got to stop, slow down, change gears, deal with the ghosts. And we did have a lot of fun discussing those timing issues. I love the games where you're like, now is the time to do this, now is the time to do this. There's a lot of push your luck elements here. And one thing we didn't mention, which is one of my favorite little subtle decision points here, is you get these tiles, they've got ghosts on them, and you've got not only the decision of what's the best place to score points, but should we be using this tile to take care of ghosts? and you put it a certain way, you can get rid of ghosts in multiple ways. You can complete these mists and get rid of them, or you can complete a road and then take off 3. And so it's sort of like a multi-use tile, and I do think that makes the decision space more interesting.
Yeah. Okay, so another thing I can't believe that you didn't bring up is our fascination with the idea of like turning Euro games into cooperative games. Our shining example of this is right back over here, which is Orléans.
This does feel a little bit like Orléans in terms of no ramping, but you've got this deadline at which you have to get some score.
Yeah, there's very few games out there that really essentially take a cooperative game and turn it into a competitive game and turn it into a cooperative game. And this is really well done. I was very excited when they announced this, and I was really keeping tabs on this for a while. It was delayed for a while. I was really excited because like I really love that idea. And I think this is, there's very few examples of how, we don't really care for Valeria, Card Kingdoms of Valeria, but they made the game into a competitive game or cooperative game quite nicely in terms of keeping most of this really.
I don't know if I completely agree.
We're not a big fan of that game, but my point is like I'm always going to be interested to see how they implement that.
This is a very well, and it feels like Carcassonne. It doesn't feel like they've changed much, and they've somehow managed to pull it off.
Yeah. Okay.
All right,
final thoughts.
Yeah, final. I've given my final thoughts. I think I'm ready to.
Well, I'll say this.
Yeah.
It was quick to pick up, quick to play, enjoyable to play, and I'm like, there's not that much meat on the bone, but having those quick tactical decisions all the time, I found very fascinating. And whenever we finished a game, the best compliment you can give to a game is that you're like, let's play again. And that's how I felt. And honestly, we played this. We went to the 6th level, which is the most difficult level. It was like 4 a.m. or whatever. And that was a much longer game.
You were standing up for the second half.
I was just like standing over the table the whole time, like like just absolutely, into it. Because it was so difficult, and I mean that's saying something, I think. So I quite enjoyed it. I think it's absolutely an easy recommend for a buy because quick to play, inexpensive to buy, easy to learn, and it's fun.
You want to give it a number?
I'll give it an 8. I think it's probably maybe an 8.5.
I think that's a pretty good number. I'd probably give it an 8 as well. You're giving it an 8. Okay, I'm going to give it an 8, but with an asterisk that I do think this is very consumable and almost like a snack. Yeah. And you shouldn't, at least if you're sympathetic, if you play games the way I do, maybe you're going to get 1 or 2 full days of play out of it, and then not really want to come back to it.
We also have a playthrough on the channel if you want to check that out. It's very brief. As I said, we just play through the first level, which is spoiler-free, although I don't really think the spoilers is a real big part of this game. Well, thanks for joining us, and we will see you on the next episode. Okay, so Mists over Carcassonne is a completely standalone game, but it can also be used as an expansion for normal Carcassonne if you played that before.
But only in competitive mode if you play it as an expansion. You don't like that? You don't like it's when the improv happens, you're like,
It reminds me of when somebody you're teaching a game and you're like you intentionally leave something out because
that's horrible.
And then somebody's
that's
like, except in this
it's the worst.
It's like sometimes I'll just be like, don't listen to that. And I'll say it like that because it's rude to do it.
It is. It's terrible. It's very disruptive.
It's
very
disruptive. Much easier to be like, you can do 3 actions. It's this, and this. Except in these other 5 cases where you can do other actions.
Yeah,
it's like,
and you're like, I was just going to get to that too.
Yeah, it's like, let me grasp the concept of the game. Okay,
you want to teach it? You teach it. Otherwise, just sit down and shut up.
We're on a clock. So, as you would expect from a big game, okay, no, ready? So as you would expect from Asmodee, the production is lovely. The art is fine.
Asmodee?
Isn't Asmodee own everything? Isn't Asmodee own Carcassonne?
Hans im Gluck.
But Asmodee is the parent company.
I don't know what it's nowhere on the box.
Go ahead. Because Z-Man was bought by
what are you doing to yourself?
So the art theme and components are all fine. Like the art looks good, the components are good. It's a relatively pretty inexpensive game, and the theme makes sense in a sort of kind of way. But in general, it's a pretty light game in some ways to learn and etc. Okay, I want to do that again, but
Yeah,
I think
you
I'm on.
don't
I
need
think,
to.
I think I'm on now. I think I'm on.
Why
now.
don't you see if you stretch that out another 5 minutes?
Yeah, well, that's why I was trying to. Ready? Okay.